Genesis chapter 21. Okay, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Wow, so much information in here. Let's go through it. Verse 1, Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah got pregnant. Sarah had a baby. She had a son. How do we know that's being gracious? Some women don't want to have kids. Well, we know Sarah did want to have a child, because back in chapter 18, when the Lord appeared to Abraham and Sarah was in the tent listening, in verse 12 of chapter 18 it says, So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, After I am worn out and my master is old, will I now have this pleasure? So she apparently wanted to have children. Okay, verse 2 of chapter 21, Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age, at the very time God had promised him. What time had God promised him? When the Lord appeared to Abraham in chapter 18, the Lord and two other men appeared because they were going to go check out Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 10 it says, Then the Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. So they had a pretty good idea when Sarah was going to have this son. Now that she had this son, Abraham should be expecting a visit from the Lord. Because didn't he just say that? I will surely return to you about this time next year. So he should be expecting the Lord to return. Okay. So, verse 3 of chapter 21. Abraham gave him the name Isaac. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. Okay. We knew that was going to happen. Let's get back to chapter 17. Yep. Verse 19. Then God said, Yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. Okay. I'm going to keep my finger there because there's more that's important there. Okay. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him, as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Okay. So, it says when Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. God commanded that back in chapter 17. When God said, starting with verse 9, then God said to Abraham, As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant. The sign. So it's not the covenant, it's the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised. So here we go. Verse 4 of chapter 21, when his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Let's remember that. Abraham was 100 years old. We had already figured out in the previous chapter somewhere that Sarah was 10 years younger approximately, so she's 90 when Isaac is born. Verse 6. Oh, we also know, remember when it says Abraham was 99 in chapter 17, verse 24, Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. So Abraham's now 100, his son's 14, Ishmael's 14. So Ishmael's 14 years old when Isaac is born. There's a big age difference between the two. A lot of information in this few verses. Okay. Verse 6, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Okay, is she talking about now because she's really happy she had this baby? Or is she thinking about when the three visitors appeared in chapter 18 in verse 12 when it says, So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, Am I going to have this pleasure? So, verse 6 of chapter 21, Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age. Who would have said it? Well, nobody. That would be crazy. She's already gone through menopause. She's worn out, she said. But the 3 visitors appeared, and the Lord said that she would bear a son. So that's who said it. Verse 8, the child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. So we don't know what age Isaac was when he was weaned. We don't know. We could guess, maybe 2. I don't know. Some kids are as old as 5. Who knows? Remember, they couldn't go buy Similac or baby food or something like that and wean them and then put them on the bottle. It didn't work that way. Verse 8, the child grew and was weaned. And on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And okay, so Sarah and Hagar have had their share of problems. We never heard about those problems until Sarah comes up with the bright idea and says to her husband, let's go back to that, chapter 16. Now Sarai, which is what she was called before, Abram's wife, which is what he was called before, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian maidservant named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go sleep with my maidservant. Perhaps I can build a family through her. They seem to get along until Hagar gets pregnant. And we find out later on in the chapter that something happens to where Sarah is now mistreating Hagar. It says that in chapter 16, verse 4, that Hagar began to despise her mistress. It says in chapter 16, verse 6, Sarah mistreated Hagar. Then we find out that Hagar runs away and she's sent back. So they're having problems. So Hagar has a son, and the son is at least 14, would have been 14 when the child was born. Now the child's weaned, so the son's older than that. I would say at least 16, if not older. Okay, and now, since Ishmael is like 16 or older probably, and we've got Sarah, who now bears a child for Abraham. Okay, and when the child's weaned, Sarah looks over and sees Ishmael, this boy who's at least 16 or older, making fun of her at least 2-year-old or older, mocking him. And she gets very angry. So I'm going to go back to verse 8. The child grew and was weaned, and on the day Isaac was weaned, Abraham held a great feast. But Sarah saw that the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham was mocking. And she said to Abraham, get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Okay, what I had read to you before, at the beginning of her bright idea of giving her maidservant to her husband, she was calling her maidservant. Chapter 16, verse 2, she says, go and sleep with my maidservant. She was calling her maidservant back then. Now she's calling her a slave. Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Verse 11. The matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. So he wasn't distressed to have Hagar leave. He never really considered Hagar his wife. Even though he slept with her and had a child to her, per their custom, that was so Sarah could have a child. And you can go back to chapter 16 to try to understand that. But anyway, we know that when this problem first arrived between Sarah and Hagar, and Sarai and Hagar, Sarai went to Abram and said, basically, you caused this. She said in chapter 16, verse 5, you are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. Even though it was her idea to come up, that she came up with this plan. Okay, so she was mad at Abraham, and his response was, and this is real important, chapter 16, verse 6, your servant is in your hands, Abram said. Do with her whatever you think best. He's not saying my wife. He's telling Sarai she's still your servant. So he's not thinking of Hagar as his wife. But he does think of Ishmael as his son, per their custom. And besides, Ishmael is his son. Okay? Sarah should be thinking of Ishmael as her son as well, per their custom. But she's not. Get rid of that slave woman and her son, for that slave woman's son will never share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. Verse 11, the matter distressed Abraham greatly because it concerned his son. Wow, he's got trouble in the camp between the two women and now between his two sons. Verse 12, but God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. Okay. God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. God doesn't say, your slave. Okay. Notice also, were we expecting the Lord to return? Yeah. He had said, I'll return to you this time next year, and your wife will have borne you a son. Okay. Well, here's his return. We don't know if this return was just a vocal, just a voice, or actually if he appeared to him. Verse 12, but God said to him, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. I said I would keep my finger here, but I didn't, but there it is. Genesis chapter 17, I had just read verse 19. I'm going to go back and read that, but I'm going to read a little bit further. Then God said, yes, but your wife Sarah will bear you a son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and will greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year. So, the promise, the sign of this promise is circumcision. But the promise about how God will be the father, the promise is in chapter 17, verse 7, I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you are now an alien, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. That's the promise. That's the covenant. And the promise is supposed to go through Isaac, not through Ishmael. So God says, do not be so distressed about the boy and your maidservant. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you, because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Interesting wording. It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Reckoned. It's almost as if they have a debt they have to pay. Reckoned. It's an interesting word. I only use that when I'm doing my banking, and I'm doing a bank reconciliation, and I'm trying to figure out where all the money came from, where all the money went, and exactly how much money I have left. Okay, so he uses an interesting wording here. He says it is because it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Some people see that as in the future, Jesus coming from that line, and that Jesus pays for the debts of everyone's sins. Verse 13, I will make the son of the maidservant into a nation also, because he is your offspring. We just read that. He had promised back in chapter 17 to Abraham that Ishmael would be a great nation. Also in the chapter before that, when Hagar ran away in chapter 16, he promised to Hagar. Well, the angel of the Lord did. The angel of the Lord said, chapter 16, verse 9, then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress, Sarai, actually, at that time, and submit to her. The angel added, I will so increase your descendants that they will be too numerous to count. Okay. So, a lot of stuff that was pre-told that's occurring now. All right. So, we're getting to verse 14 of chapter 21. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Think about this. We know the boy was 13 when he was circumcised, when his father was 99. So he was 14 when Isaac was born. So he's 14 years older than Isaac. Isaac is now weaned. We don't know the age. But whatever that age is, add 14, and that's how old Ishmael is. If I've been getting names confused, I'm so sorry. So Ishmael is 14 years older than Isaac. He's been weaned. We could guess an age, 12. That makes Ishmael, 16? What if Isaac's 5? That would make Ishmael 19. Ishmael is probably at least a teenager. We know he's at least a teenager. Okay? I would say it was a good guess he's between 16 and 19. I don't think we're told exactly when the child was weaned, when Isaac was weaned. Okay, so we've got a teenage boy here. And Abraham's going to send them away in obedience to Sarah, because the Lord said, listen to Sarah. Now, can I go back and just say one thing? So many men don't like to listen to their wives, but I love this. Just go back to that verse. I love that. Listen to whatever Sarah tells you. The Lord told Abraham to listen to his wife. Yay! Okay, but that was just one time. Can't use that forever. Okay, so there may be other times where a man should listen to his wife. Okay? Anyway, so early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. He didn't bother to put it on Ishmael's shoulders. Why wouldn't Ishmael carry the weight? Why is Hagar carrying all the weight? She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. Verse 15. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. Wow. Did he get that weak that fast? That they're now out of water. And he's not even carrying the burden. And she has to put him under the bushes. She's carrying all the load, and now she's taking care of him. Then she went off and sat nearby, about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. So the boy was not in as good a physical condition as she was, obviously. She carried the food and the water. He wore out first. She had to put him under a tree, under bushes. And she knows the boy's going to die, because she went a distance away, about a bow shot away, and thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there nearby, she began to sob. Verse 17, God heard the boy crying. And the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up and take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. So he can't even get up on his own. She has to lift him up and take him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation. Verse 19, then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. He opened her eyes. She's not blind from what we know. We have no reason to believe that she's blind. But how would you miss a well of water right there in the middle of the desert? So, was the well always there? And for some reason, she was unable to see it? Almost like it was in another dimension? I mean, I don't know. Think about that. What happens that it says here, then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. Verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert and became an archer. So he's not like completely physically inept. He becomes an archer. Boy, he must have really been in bad shape, though, when he was between 16 and 19 years old, though, that his mom had to carry all the weight and he couldn't even make it through the desert. Maybe he was spoiled all the time by Abraham, since that was his firstborn son. I mean, maybe. We know that Hagar was a maidservant, a slave, according to Sarah. She was probably worked very hard, much more physically able to do stuff. It could be that Ishmael never had to do anything. So verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. God was with the boy as he grew up. Verse 20, God was with the boy as he grew up. Cool. He lived in the desert and became an archer. Verse 21, while he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. His mom got a wife for him. Verse 22. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, said to Abraham, God is with you in everything you do. Now swear to me here before God that you will not deal falsely with me or my children or my descendants. Show to me and to the country where you are living as an alien the same kindness I have shown you. So Abimelech and his army commander go to Abraham, who's living in his country, and says, let's make a treaty. Okay? I've always treated you nicely. Now swear you always treat me nicely and my descendants after me. Verse 24, Abraham said, I swear it. Verse 25, then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. But Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this. You did not tell me, and I heard about it only today. I get the feeling that something was going on in this nation, and people could feel the tension, or there were rumors going around, and it got to the leader, I guess he was the king, Abimelech, and Abimelech said, oh my gosh, something's wrong. Abraham's not happy. We have to make sure he's not going to turn against us. So he takes his army commander and says, let's go make a treaty with Abraham. So they do. And then Abraham voices his complaint. Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. So Abraham feels this well of water was his, and Abimelech's servants took it. Well, you can't take a well, but they took control of it. Verse 26, Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this, so I don't know which of my servants did this. And you didn't tell me, and I only heard about it today. So he's saying, this is why I feel this is something that already happened. I get the feeling that Abimelech knew there was a problem, didn't know what it was, and he's like, well, you didn't tell me. If you'd have just told me, we could have taken care of this whole thing. Okay, verse 27, so Abraham brought sheep and cattle and gave them to Abimelech, and the two men made a treaty. Abraham set apart 7 ewe lambs from the flock, and Abimelech asked Abraham, what is the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs you have set apart by themselves? Verse 30, he replied, except these 7 lambs, from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. So he's saying, I did dig this well. This well doesn't belong to you. And here are 7 ewe lambs that you can have, and this is my way of proving I dug the well. It doesn't really prove anything. It's almost like buying the well back. He replied, accept these 7 lambs from my hand as a witness that I dug this well. Verse 31, so that place was called Beersheba, because the 2 men swore an oath there. I don't know what Beersheba means, but remember, names back then meant something. So that place probably wasn't called Beersheba before that, but now it is, and it was through this writing every time they talked about it. But it must mean something to do with swearing an oath, because it says, so that place was called Beersheba because the 2 men swore an oath there. Verse 32, after the treaty had been made at Beersheba, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. So that's probably where he actually lived, but he probably was also in control of this land where Abraham was living. Verse 33, Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. Wow. Before this, we'd hear about them building altars and calling on the name of the Lord. But this time he didn't build an altar and call on the name of the Lord. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there he called upon the name of the Lord, the eternal God. So he called upon his name, Yahweh, or Yahweh, or whatever it is. Exactly. I can't tell you the exact pronunciation. I don't know if I'd be right. Verse 34, and Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. That's kind of weird, because it says in verse 34 that Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his forces, returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba and called upon the name of the Lord. And then Abraham stayed in the land of the Philistines for a long time. So did he go then move to where Abimelech was? Was he already there? Was he spread out both places? I don't know. That I don't know. You'll have to... Some things we just don't know exactly, and we have to do our best at guessing, or it's just not important enough to really matter at this point. Okay, and that is the end of chapter 21.